Welcome to Mind Research Rewired. We unveil scientific truths to transform confusion into clear thinking. Unlock a sharper, more effective you based on proven research. Subscribe now and elevate your life.
Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to becoming truly well-informed on some fascinating subjects. Today we're really embarking on a journey, diving into the mechanics of human thought itself. We've got this great collection of sources, articles, bits of research, notes, all trying to get at what thinking actually is. Our mission today is to unpack all this for you, give you that shortcut to understanding how our minds really work.
And right off the bat, these sources give us a pretty profound but also quite precise definition of thinking. It's not just, daydreaming or letting your mind wander. They describe it as the systematic transformation of mental representations of knowledge to characterize actual or possible states of the world, often in service of goals.
Okay, systematic transformation, mental representations in service of goals, so it's purposeful.
Exactly. It involves manipulating these internal descriptions, these representations, systematically. It goes beyond just like random, unconstrained associations.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this then. We'll explore the pioneers who kind of laid the groundwork first. Then we can dive into how we perceive similarities, how we form concepts. That seems fundamental. And then maybe unravel some of those really intricate processes like relational reasoning, causal reasoning, even deduction and visual thinking.
Absolutely. And we'll connect it all to the bigger picture too. We'll look at implicit cognition, the stuff happening below conscious awareness and how that shapes what we do. We'll touch on how thinking changes with age, some surprising stuff from non-human primates.
Yeah.
And even the huge impact of things like language, culture, and specific areas like legal or scientific thinking. It's a really rich landscape.
Yeah, it sounds like it. We all think we know what thinking is, right? But these sources give us that deeper scientific angle. It's not just floating thoughts, it's this systematic transformation. Almost sounds like engineering in the head.
It does a bit. And what's fascinating is how this field really builds on the work of, giants. You've got Jean Piaget and Lev Vygotsky. Their work on cognitive development basically mapped how our thinking grows. Charles Spearman, who pioneered studying individual differences in intelligence. Why are some people better at certain thinking tasks? And Alexander Luria, the neurologist, he was way ahead of his time, showing specific brain areas were crucial for different kinds of thought, sort of anticipating cognitive neuroscience.
So it's not just psychology then, it pulls from other fields too.
Oh, definitely. Around the same time, you had Herbert Simon. He later won a Nobel in economics, actually. He argued that economics couldn't just assume people are perfectly rational. You have to account for human resource constraints. Things like our limited attention, our memory not being infinite, just not having enough time.
That raises a huge question, doesn't it? How much do those limits actually define how we think?
Exactly. Do they box us in? Or do they maybe shape our particular kind of intelligence? It's a core question.
Okay, so one fundamental aspect the sources bring up is how we perceive and use similarity. They call it a kind of diagnostic tool for how our minds organize knowledge, like a mental fingerprint.
That's a great way to put it. Psychologists don't exactly have a microscope for the mind, right? But looking at what people judge as similar, these appraisals of similarity, gives us a really powerful, though indirect, window into how knowledge is represented.
Right. And here's where it gets really interesting, according to the sources. Similarity isn't always simple. There's this example, figure 2.3. You have a target T, maybe a checked triangle and a checked circle. Then set A has, say, a checked circle, an unfilled triangle, and a square. Set B has an unfilled circle, an unfilled triangle, and a square. And people apparently choose set B as both more similar A and D, more different from the target T compared to set A. How does that even work?
It sounds paradoxical, doesn't it? But it tells us something crucial. Early ideas like featural analysis or the contrast model thought we just break things down into lists of features like shape, pattern, size. And that worked okay for some things like maybe speech perception. But the problem with just listing features is they're unstructured representations. They don't capture the relationships between the features.
So it's not just what features are there, but how they're connected. The structure matters.
Precisely. Our minds use structured representations. Two key types the sources mention are propositional structures. Think of them like mental statements about relations. Above, triangle, circle is different from above, circle, triangle. The order, the relation is key. And hierarchical structures where things are embedded. X is part of Y or X is a kind of Y, like A canary is a bird.
Okay, so we're not just matching lists, we're matching these complex structures, these relationships and hierarchies.
You got it. And that allows for much more nuanced comparisons, explaining that weird similarity judgment. Set B might share the underlying structure, two shapes, one square, better, making it seem more similar in one way, but lack the specific feature, checking, making it seem more different in another.
That makes so much more sense. So how does this structured view play out in how we form concepts like dog or justice?
Well, our memory tends to group concepts by similarity in meaning, as you'd expect. But there were some early debates, skirmishes, the sources call them, between two big theories. First, prototype theories. The idea was we represent a category with a sort of best example or average, like the typical robin for bird.
Okay, that seems intuitive.
It does, but it runs into trouble. Like, what's the prototype for birds that are pets? A parakeet, maybe? But a parakeet isn't a very typical bird overall, nor maybe a typical pet overall.
Prototypes don't combine well. They also tend to miss within category correlations, like the fact that small birds are more likely to sing. That's hard to capture with just an average prototype.
So what was the alternative? Exemplar models. These suggest we don't store an average, but instead store lots of individual instances, actual examples we've encountered. So you recognize a new bird as a bird because it's similar to lots of specific birds you remember. These models generally did a better job explaining those nuances and correlations, so they were often favored in those early comparisons.
This whole discussion about categories makes me wonder, do people believe things like dogs or gold have some kind of deep underlying nature? What essence?
You're hitting on psychological essentialism. That's exactly the term. It's the belief, and it's quite common, that natural kinds, things like animal species or substances like gold, have this internal hidden essence. This essence is thought to be responsible for their observable properties and makes them what they are. Now, it's important. This is about people's beliefs. Whether these essences actually exist is another question. Biologists mostly say no for species, though maybe for chemical elements like gold, it fits a bit better.
Interesting. And do categories change depending on how we're using them at the moment?
Yes, absolutely. The way we represent a category isn't fixed. It depends on the task, on its use. And how we use a category now can affect how we categorize things later. For instance, having a really clear, cohesive category structure seems more important when you need to use the category to make inferences of new things rather than just classifying them. It's about how useful the category is for predicting stuff.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. What about relational thinking, seeing analogies, applying rules?
Yeah.
That feels like a really core human thing. Our sources call it ubiquitous.
It really is. It underpins so much problem solving, understanding language, scientific discovery. The sources break down analogical reasoning into roughly 4 parts. Think of figure 6.1. First, there's retrieval. You have a new problem, the target, and you need to recall a relevant source problem or situation from memory. Then mapping. This is where you line up the elements, find the systematic correspondences between the source and the target. Then comes inference. You use the mapping to draw new conclusions about the target based on what you know about the source. And finally, learning. This is crucial. You might form a more abstract schema from the analogy, a general pattern you can apply elsewhere, like Darwin's natural selection becoming a general selection theory.
That sounds like quite a bit of mental work. Does our working memory get heavily involved?
Oh, absolutely critical. Analogical reasoning makes critical use of working memory, the sources say, because you're holding and manipulating these structured representations we talked about earlier. There's a neat example, figure 6.3, with picture mapping. If you just ask people to match one object, like a man to a boy, they might just go for visual similarity. But if you ask them to match 3 related objects, say, a man holding a stick with his dog on a leash, people shift. They start making relational matches, like matching the man to someone else who possesses related items. The structure dominates when the task demands it.
And the sources point out a difference between experts and novices here, right?
Yes, a really important one. Experts tend to focus on the deep similarities, the underlying principles or causal structures. A physicist sees 2 problems needing the same force calculation, even if one involves a spring and the other planets. Novices often get distracted by the superficial features of the spring, the planets. They don't see the deeper analogy. That's why teaching methods that help people extract the goal-relevant relations, the abstract schema, are more effective than just focusing on surface details.
Which brings up the question, Can AI do this? Can machines make these kinds of deep analogies?
Well, people are certainly trying. There are computational models like SIAM, SME, ACME, LISA. SME, the structure mapping engine, is a classic. It tries to model the mapping and inference parts using a formal logic-like notation. Our sources even show it mapping World War II events to the First Gulf War, finding parallels based on the represented relations.
But there are challenges.
Big challenges. A key one is called role binding. Many AI models, especially older connectionist ones, struggle to represent a relationship like love's separately from the things in that relationship. So differentiating John loves Mary from Mary loves John is hard without creating separate units for every single possible combination. Humans do this effortlessly. They also often fail at simple generalizations. If you train a person on 1 goes to 1, 2 goes to 2, 3 goes to 3, they instantly know 4 goes to 4. But some AI models might not because they lack the capacity to represent variables. The abstract concept of n goes to n. It highlights a gap.
Okay, let's switch to another fundamental human drive, finding causes. Why did that happen? Hume talked about our instinctive habit of association. Quine added the idea of an innate similarity space that shifts as we learn more theory. We seem wired for why.
We really do. And our research shows strong parallels between human causal reasoning and basic learning processes seen in animal conditioning. 2 key factors pop up again and again. Q outcome contingency. How reliably does the potential cause predict the effect? And temporal contiguity. How close in time do they happen? If A always happens right before B, we strongly suspect A causes B.
So here's a classic scenario. A and B together cause something. Then we find out B alone also causes it. What happens to our belief about A being a cause?
That's the blocking phenomenon. A's status as a cause gets weakened or blocked.
Right.
Because B already explains the outcome, A seems less necessary. What's really interesting here is the directional nature of the causal arrow, as the sources put it. Causes compete to explain an effect, but effects don't compete. If one cause, O, leads to both effect A and effect B, learning that O causes B doesn't make us doubt that O also causes A. Multiple effects from one cause are fine.
But what if there isn't a clear correlation? Sometimes we infer causality even when things don't obviously co-occur, right?
Yes, and that's where theories like the PowerPC theory by P.W. Cheng come in. It helps explain how we infer causation even when the simple covariation, the co-occurrence rate, might be 0, especially with ceiling effects. Think about an allergic reaction. Maybe allergen A causes a strong reaction. Adding allergen B causes the same strong reaction. It can't get any worse, it's hit the ceiling. In this case, even though B didn't increase the reaction, 0 covariation in a sense, we might still think B could be a cause on its own. Its potential isn't ruled out. But if the reaction wasn't at a ceiling and adding B did nothing, then we'd conclude B isn't causal. The theory suggests our minds are doing this quite sophisticated retrospective reevaluation, considering the maximum possible effect.
Moving into logic, deductive reasoning. This goes way back to philosophy, tying rationality very closely to logicality.
Absolutely. And it's fascinating to see where human intuition aligns with formal logic and where it diverges. Take 2 basic argument forms, modus ponens, MP, and modus tollens, MP. MP is, if A then B, A happened, therefore B happened. People are almost perfect at this, it feels obvious, but MT is, if A then B, B did not happen, therefore A did not happen. Logically, this is just as valid, but people find it much harder. We often fail to draw that conclusion.
So what does that tell us about everyday reasoning? Are we just not logical?
Well, not always formally logical, no. The sources make a really useful distinction between normative rationality, what pure logic says we should do, and personal rationality, what's actually helpful or adaptive for us in the real world. We often carry over inappropriate but normally useful procedures. We use mental shortcuts that work most of the time, even if they aren't logically perfect.
And this brings us to something called the belief bias effect, which seems really important for understanding real-world arguments.
It's huge. The belief bias shows we tend to judge arguments based on whether we find the conclusion believable, rather than on whether the logic itself is valid. There's that famous example with phyllones. If I say, all fish are phyllones, all phyllones are trout, therefore all fish are trout. Logically, if you accept those premises, the conclusion follows. The argument form is valid, but because you know the conclusion, all fish are trout, is false, you resist the argument. You don't like it. We tend to evaluate the overall soundness validity plus true premises, not just the validity in isolation. We want arguments to make real-world sense.
This sounds like it leads directly into the dual systems theory of thinking. This seems like a really dominant idea now.
It really is. It proposes we have these two fundamental ways of thinking. System one is the evolutionarily ancient one. It's fast, automatic, intuitive, associative. It runs on heuristics, gives us those gut feelings. It operates largely unconsciously. System two is more recent, maybe uniquely human. It's slow, deliberate, sequential, effortful. It requires working memory, conscious attention, and it's linked to general intelligence or IQ.
So how do we know which system is running the show? Can we choose?
It seems to depend partly on the situation and instructions. If you explicitly tell someone, reason logically, they're more likely to engage System 2 and try to override System 1's intuitive, often belief-based responses. If the instructions are more lax, System 1 has more sway. And here's strong evidence. The ability to resist that belief bias effect, to follow logic even when the conclusion is unbelievable, is strongly linked to measures of cognitive ability, like working memory capacity. And importantly, this ability declines sharply in old age, which fits with known age-related changes in cognitive resources supporting System 2. It really looks like two different systems are at play.
Okay, shifting senses now. We don't just think in abstract propositions, we use mental images, visuospatial reasoning.
Right. The core idea is that mental imagery is a lot like perception. When you imagine seeing something, parts of your brain active during actual seeing light up. And mental transformations, like rotating an object in your mind's eye, seem to mimic actual physical transformations. The time it takes reflects the complexity of the rotation.
So that classic experiment where people memorize a map and then mentally scan between points, is that really like looking at a map?
The evidence strongly suggests yes. Koslin's mental scanning studies, like in Figure 10.2, found that the time taken to mentally scan between 2 points on a memorized map was directly proportional to the actual distance on the map. It's as if we were traversing a mental space with depictive properties. Our judgments about space also fit with spatial framework theory. We access spatial information relative to our own body axes, like head, feet, front, back, left, right. Some directions are easier to think about than others.
But our mental maps aren't perfect photographs, are they? The sources mention a cognitive collage.
Exactly. We don't usually retrieve a complete high-fidelity map. Instead, our minds often construct these spatial representations on the fly. It's more like a cognitive collage, schematic, simplified, sometimes even hiding inconsistencies to avoid overloading working memory. We build what we need for the task at hand. It's efficient.
And we use this spatial thinking for abstract concepts too, don't we? Like timelines or graphs.
Absolutely. Even young kids spontaneously use space, like placing stickers on the line, to represent abstract things like how much they like something or quantities. And there's this really strong cross-cultural tendency to map increases onto upward direction. Think about stock market graphs or phrases like feeling up or spirits rising. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How much of our abstract thought is fundamentally built upon these basic spatial intuitions derived from our physical experience?
It seems like the spatial ability would be crucial in fields like design or invention.
Definitely. Especially the idea of making inferences from sketches. Designers often make early sketches deliberately ambiguous or underspecified. Then, by looking back at the sketch, re-examining it, they can see new configurations and relations that generate new design ideas. They discover things in their own drawings. Figure 10.7 shows an architect doing just this, having an unintentional discovery by reinterpreting their own sketch. It's a productive cycle of drawing and seeing.
Okay, let's crunch some numbers. Mathematical thinking, where does that come from? Is it built on language?
Interestingly, the sources suggest the deep foundations of math cognition are not primarily language-based. We see evidence of quantity estimation and basic arithmetic reasoning in animals that don't have language. And humans seem to share very similar nonverbal mechanisms. The argument is that this basic number sense likely evolved because arithmetic captures really important properties of the world, things vital for survival, like tracking food or group members.
And are there universal patterns in how we perceive numbers, even across species?
Yes. One striking example is scalar variability. This means the fuzziness or variability in our estimate of a number or duration is proportional to the size of that number or duration. Bigger numbers are harder to estimate precisely. And you see this pattern in rats, pigeons, monkeys, and humans, for instance, when people are asked to press a key repeatedly without counting. It seems to be a fundamental property of our internal number line.
What about recognizing small numbers instantly? That feeling of just knowing there are 3 dots without counting?
That's subitizing. It's the rapid, accurate, almost effortless perception of small quantities, usually up to maybe 3 or 4 items. What's odd is that the reaction time increase for each additional item in this subitizing range is quite large compared to counting larger sets. It suggests it's a distinct process, not just ultra-fast counting.
So how does this connect to kids learning numbers? Do they grasp quantity early?
Gelman's magic experiments, mentioned in the sources, are quite convincing here. They show that even toddlers, around 2.5 years old, understand that the number of items is the decisive dimension in certain tasks. They'll spontaneously count objects to justify why one plate wins over another if winning depends on having more items. It shows an early, genuinely numerical understanding, not just a vague sense of more.
Now let's go beneath the surface. Implicit cognition, all the thinking and processing happening without conscious awareness.
Right, there seems to be this incredibly sophisticated cognitive system that operates largely independent of consciousness. A big debate, according to the sources, is whether this implicit system can also handle symbolic processing, manipulating abstract rules and representations like System 2 does. Some argue that this unconscious system is actually responsible for much of the complexity and adaptiveness of human behavior. End quote. We're just not aware of most of what our brain is doing.
Can things we're not even aware of seeing actually influence us, like subliminal messages?
The evidence suggests yes, to some extent.
Yeah.
Marcel's classic experiments from 1983 used subliminally presented words shown too fast to be consciously identified. Even though people couldn't report seeing the word, its meaning, semantic information, and even its visual form, graphic information, could still influence their subsequent choices or reaction times on related tasks. It shows that a complete lack of awareness does not entirely remove that effect. The information gets processed implicitly.
So does this mean we have separate memory systems for conscious explicit and unconscious implicit knowledge?
The evidence points strongly in that direction. The sources talk about dissociation between implicit and explicit memory across a rather impressive array of specific tasks. You see it in motor skill learning. You get better at typing without remembering practicing. Category learning, classical conditioning, even decision-making. People with certain types of brain damage might lose explicit memory but retain implicit learning, or vice versa. They seem to be distinct systems. And maybe even more intriguing, the sources suggest complex processes such as problem solving or creative invention can be influenced by previously encountered experiences that are not, at the critical time of the task, consciously available. Incubation effects, perhaps, where answers pop into mind later.
Okay, we've explored so many pieces. Let's try to connect them to the bigger picture, how thinking works in different contexts, across the lifespan, even across species.
Right, putting it all together. So aging and reasoning. The sources indicate that performance on tasks needing analytical and integrative reasoning tends to decline linearly with age, with a notable drop by age 70. This seems linked to the online availability of information, basically. Working memory resources, which we know decline.
What about other species? Can animals reason abstractly?
Some evidence suggests they can think beyond the information given. Take non-human primate reasoning. Chimpanzees, in tasks testing conservation of liquid quantity, could make correct judgments based on logical necessity if they saw the amounts before they were poured into different shaped containers. This hints at some capacity for abstract reasoning beyond just perception.
And the age-old question, does the language we speak shape how we think? Language and thought.
Linguistic relativity. It's a complex issue. Our sources suggest that while infants might start with some universal core knowledge, language can influence thought. It can bend psychological ontologies, change how we carve up the world into categories, or make certain distinctions more obvious or salient. But it's not always absolute. Sometimes naming something and thinking about it seem like distinct processes. Language influences, but maybe doesn't fully determine thought.
And culture, how does that play in? Culture and thinking.
This is where it gets really fascinating. The sources bring up Michael Cole's research with the Capel tribe in Liberia. When asked to sort objects like tools, food, containers, the Capel adults consistently sorted them functionally, putting a knife with an orange, because they use yang to cut an orange. In Western intelligence tests, sorting hierarchically, knife with tools, orange with food, is considered the more intelligent way. But here's the kicker. When Cole asked them to sort the items as a foolish person would, they immediately sorted them hierarchically.
Wow. So they could do it, they just didn't think it was the smart way to do it.
Exactly. It brilliantly highlights that people in different cultures may have quite different ideas of what it means to be smart. Functional sorting was more relevant to their lives. It challenges our culturally bound definitions of intelligence.
That's a powerful example. What about highly specialized domains, like legal reasoning? Do judges think differently?
Historically, there was a tension. Formalism viewed law almost like a science, finding the right category for a case. Legal realism, on the other hand, emphasized that judges are human. Their decisions are influenced by social factors, psychology, not just pure legal rules. Our sources point out that the adversarial system creates pressure for a dichotomous decision: guilty, not guilty, liable, not liable. This can lead to a kind of tunnel vision where a judge, once leaning one way, starts to discount contradictory evidence. Initial doubts fade. Judicial opinions often end up written with this sense of unequivocal support for the one decision, a feeling of singular correctness, even if the initial situation was messy and ambiguous. The sources say this drive for coherence is the basic cognitive process, just amplified in the legal setting.
And finally, scientific thinking. Is that a special kind of thought, or just applying general thinking skills?
The sources frame it largely as a form of problem-solving, a search in a problem space for explanations or solutions. Scientists are definitely prone to confirmation bias, like all of us designing experiments that are likely to support their favorite hypothesis, though they also often use a strategic approach, a confirm early, disconfirm late strategy. Test the likely things first, then try to break the theory. What's really highlighted is the critical role of unexpected findings. One study found over half the results in molecular biology labs were unexpected. These anomalies are huge drivers of causal reasoning and scientific progress. Ultimately, the scientific brain seems to use the same basic cognitive toolkit as everyday thinking, just combined and applied rigorously. There's even neural evidence showing brain activity shifts as people undergo conceptual change, like learning Newtonian physics after holding naive beliefs.
Wow, what a journey through the landscape of thought. From those basic mental transformations to how culture shapes intelligence to how judges and scientists reason, it's incredibly complex.
It really is. We've seen how those internal representations get systematically changed, how belief bias can pull us away from pure logic, and how that dance between fast intuition system 1 and slow deliberation system 2 plays out constantly.
And maybe one of the most powerful takeaways for me is just how much our context matters, the language we use, the culture we're in, even the simple diagrams we look at. They aren't just inputs, they actively shape how we think. It's this constant dynamic interaction.
Which leads to a final thought, maybe a question for you, our listener. Now that you have a glimpse into this incredible complexity, this adaptability of human thinking, how might being more aware of these underlying cognitive processes actually change how you approach things in your own life? Your learning, how you solve problems, the decisions you made every day.
Plenty to think about there. We hope this deep dive has given you lots to mull over, and maybe a new lens for looking at your own mind at work. Until next time, keep thinking deeply.
Yes, that is something for all of us to think about. We have come to the end of today's deep dive. If you like the content of our podcast and learned something useful, please subscribe to support our channel. We will continue to unveil cutting-edge scientific papers to bring clarity to your thinking and elevate your life. Thank you.